So, hi everybody, and welcome to Brain Damage Goods, the first podcast that I'm putting together. And in this one, I'm basically going to be telling my story and letting you all know where I'm coming from. But then in future episodes, these two, Sean Trotter, Chris Johnson, will be telling their stories as well. So, start off with introductions. This is Josh Gamboa.
Yep, Joshua Gamboa. Work actually with Sean here at a local technology company, and happy to be a part of the conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're here. And Sean Trotter?
Yeah, so Sean Trotter, I also work at a local technology company. I also run an informal Christian support group that we started a long time ago, which is how I interacted and met Luke. And his story was quite impactful to me. And I believe we can use our pain certainly to help others. And so I've encouraged him to tell his story.
Yes.
We want to dig deep into that story.
Yes. And you have been a huge factor in me. Actually, I really, before I told you, I hadn't told my story to many people at all. And even a lot of my close family members, because in a way you look at it and you don't want to sound crazy to people. But you also have to tell your story. You have to be bold and go out and actually let people know where you're coming from. And
you know how many people thought Jesus was crazy?
Oh, I know. Yeah, exactly.
I still think
That's to say. Well, and then we have Chris Johnson as well, who owns Living Waters Fly Shop down in downtown Round Rock. It is the only fly shop in Round Rock, and they are an amazing business. And one of the things we'll be doing in the future, I want you to introduce yourself, but we are definitely going to be talking about how you run your business and what was your motivation for actually starting it. So, Chris?
So my name is Chris Johnson, and as Luke had mentioned, I own Living Waters Fly Fishing in Round Rock, Texas. It is a guide service and basically a retail fly shop that we have right here in the heart of downtown. Christian owned and operated. We absolutely love Jesus here. It is part of our mission, our purpose. He is why we do what we do, and fishing is not even a close second. So that is what we do. So it's an honor to be here and to hear your story. And I've had a little bit of personal experience with just health stuff and struggles and things like that. So kind of interested to hear what you have to say, and then kind of look and see where we can kind of probe deeper into that.
Yes, and I'll probably be referencing it. We've talked at length, me and Sean and Chris, about my story and some of the questions that they're going to ask. And I'll probably be trying to remind them of some of the questions that I remembered. But I would encourage anyone that's watching this, if you have questions yourselves, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. I'm more than happy to speak about it and answer the questions as openly and honestly as I can. So I guess we'll go ahead and start. Basically, so I'm an 11-year brain cancer survivor, and I was diagnosed in 2010, but I have to kind of backtrack on the story to talk about where my faith journey really began. And growing up, I grew up in a Mennonite community, and so I had a fairly strong faith from early on. Great childhood, great upbringing, and my mom was very heavily involved in, I can honestly say she was my best friend. She was really heavily involved in getting me through Boy Scouts, to my Eagle Scout. She was always there for me when I needed her. I got married in 2001, on July 11th of 2001, 2 months before September 11th, and my mom had thrown me and Crystal, my wife, because we eloped down to the Gulf of Mexico. So she had thrown a reception beforehand, and it was great because we got video of that event, because unfortunately that was the actual last time that I saw her alive. And about a year and 15 days after my wife and I were married, she passed away from a very rare brain disease called Creutzfeldt-Jacobs, which is basically mad cow disease in humans. And it hit me really hard, and that's where my faith journey growing up in the church, I started asking, how could this happen? Why me? Why her? Why now? She was fairly young, and it hit me and my dad and my sister very, very profoundly, and all of her family as well. And so, that was when I kind of turned my back on faith and had
How old were you?
I was 26 at the time, and it was just tough. I mean, it was that really. I mean, I turned my back on God. I had lost all of my faith. I was so angry, and then 4 years later, when I was 30, I got hired on at the same local technology company that Josh and Sean worked for, and I was driven by ambition and greed and getting to the next level in the company and moving up, and that was my whole purpose. I mean, like I said, I had kind of dismissed the idea, that God was looking out for me. That I figured, to myself, I was looking at it like, I can do this all on my own. I don't need anything else above and beyond that. And so I was traveling all over the world. I was having a great time, drinking, out with people until all hours of the night, all over the world, Canada, Europe, Asia. And I thought that's, I was having, the time of my life. But, I didn't realize at the time, but that was driving such a huge wedge between me and my wife and my family, because that wasn't what I was concerned about. And then in January 20th of 2010, I was up in Omaha, Nebraska, speaking to a group of clients, and all morning I had been feeling like something was wrong. It was like I had a mild case of the flu, and I was executive platinum on American Airlines, and I was so I had my drink at 7 o'clock in the morning on my way up to Omaha. Physically, it was just a mess. And but I get up there, and my wife calls me, and she had just been in a wreck in our old Land Rover, and so I was a little stressed out before going into the meeting. And luckily, one thing I should say, I don't believe in luck or coincidences. So when I say luckily, it's pointing to another thing. But I was with a gentleman that was very, very outwardly Christian in his faith. And we had talked beforehand. He was just a really good guy. But I get into that meeting, and I get through, I start introducing myself, and the instant I said, my name is Luke Waddell, that's when everything kind of went black. I saw lots of pretty colors, really weird smells, and that was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't remember anything until about 11 o'clock that night. And what had happened was I had had a grand mal seizure, and I had another grand mal seizure in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And looking back on that day, and so this is one thing that I wanted to bring up, is the idea of perspective. We all have things that happen in our lives, but we, until we have some time to actually process it, we don't look back and say, okay, this is why these things happen. And we're not really grateful about the experiences that we have, because at the time, it's just bad. I mean, everything looks so bleak and dark and gloomy. But looking back on that day, I think of all of the things that could have gone so horribly wrong. I could have had the seizures on the plane. I could have had the seizures driving to the client site and killed, a family going to school. There are so many things that could have happened but didn't. I was less than 2 miles away from Creighton University, which was the only neuro-oncology hospital in the area. I had, the salesman that I was with, not only profoundly Christian, he had also been around people that had grand mal seizures. So all of this stuff started aligning. I started looking back and going, okay, what's going on here? Why did this all come together? Because again, my faith, even at that time, it wasn't there. And it took me a couple years to start looking back on it and going, okay, there was a reason all of these things coalesced, because God basically, and I tell people this with a little bit of humor, but not really. He punched me in the head and he said, "Stop! You're on the wrong path. You need to get back to your Christian roots. You need to get back on the right track that I've been telling you." I mean, because we all have that voice in our head that tells us, "Okay, you need to do this." Our sixth sense. If we can tell if something's wrong, we know if something's going to happen. And I tell people all the time, that's the Holy Spirit working through you to tell you, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's where you need to go. And we have a decision to make at that point. Do we want to listen to that voice, or do we want to completely ignore it and go down the same path that I had gone down for 3 years at that point? So after that happened, my wife flew up on my American Airlines miles. My dad drove up there to come get both of us and drive us back down to Texas. And continually, and for the first 2 weeks after I'd had my seizures, they found a mass about the size of a racquetball in my head. And that was the reason why I had the grand mal seizures. And for the first 2 weeks, it was like I was drunk. I was constantly having what they call focal seizures, where I'd just blank out at some point in time, and wouldn't have the words to talk to people. I was just happy, and I look back at that and I'm thinking, well, that was another blessing, because a lot of people that are diagnosed with these huge things, and one of the things we'll talk about with your story is you were fully aware the entire time of what was happening. And so it hit you very, very hard. For me, I didn't have that. I didn't know or care. It was just like, when the nurse woke me up at 11 that night, when I woke up, she was sitting there holding my hand, and she was like, "I don't know how to tell you this," tears in her eyes. She said, "But we found a mass in your brain." And I said, "Okay. Do you have anything to eat? I'm starving." And she was like, and so,
Wrong
she was
response.
like, "You're right, wrong response." Yeah. And so it was a blessing for that entire time. But at the same time, for my family, it was because they knew.
Yeah.
They were like, the doctors told us. They showed us the the CAT scan. When I went in, and for my first surgery, they didn't get much of it out, but they got enough of it out that it decreased the swelling in my brain, and I was able to start thinking clearly. And my wife and my dad, the first neuro-oncologist that we went to, said, they didn't get near enough. They weren't near as aggressive as they needed to be on this first surgery. And this was like a week or two after my surgery. And she said, "You need to have another surgery immediately. You need to go down to a famous hospital here in Texas." It's fine. MD Anderson. She said, you need to go down to MD Anderson and have another surgery. She was like, the prognosis for this is not good. You probably have, maybe between 3 and 5 years left. And I go down to MD Anderson, and that voice is still in my head going, you're not supposed to be here. And I'm going through MD Anderson's, all of their, the financing and all of these departments, and I get to the neuro-oncologist and I get to the neurosurgeon, and they both say, oh yeah, based on what we've seen in your, what we got back from your last surgeon, you could probably go, you might have 2 to 3 years, unless we do the surgery, this coming Friday. And this was like on a Tuesday. And the voice in my head was still going, no, don't do this. And so I got up and I walked out. My dad and my wife were so angry because we were down in front of these amazing doctors, but the Holy Spirit was telling me, no, this isn't your path. So we left there. Like I said, they were very, very, very angry at me, lecturing me the whole time back. And a week later, I found my neuro-oncologist, and my dad said, "Well, you're just doctor shopping." I'm like, "Well, yeah, kind of." And I go in to my neuro-oncologist that I have now, that I've had for 11 years now, and she said, "No, my job is to keep you." She said, "I'm not going to put a toe tag on you." She said, "I have patients that are 20 years out from a diagnosis like this." She said, "My job is to keep you alive for as long as I can." And I knew then that I had found the right person. And so it was a string of things, and that's when I started really thinking back to the day that everything had happened and where I was the 3 years before that. And when I had and not to get into a whole lot of biblical stuff or messianic, anything like that, but it was kind of ironic. I started working at this company when I was 30, and I was diagnosed when I was 33. And so it was for me. I was like, okay, all this stuff lines up. He wants me to do something with my life, something more important than just focusing on work. And I still worked at that same, at the same company for up until last year. And but I knew, and this, that first original surgery that I had in 2014, my brain tumor enhanced to a higher grade tumor. And so the surgeon that I found, he said, "This isn't a problem. We'll go in and we'll be as aggressive as we can, but you may have some after effects after it." And I did. I lost some sensation in my left hand, but fantastic surgeon. He got probably 94% of the tumor out, and it was then that and this is kind of the reason why we're having this chat today, so everybody can ask me questions. It was during that surgery that I actually had, what I call a near-death experience, vision. But he showed me what I was supposed to do with my life. And so this was in July of 2014. And when I woke up from the surgery, the first thing I asked, my doctor, because they wake you up almost immediately when they're wheeling you out to make sure that they didn't cut too much out.
That's important.
Yeah. You're not any more stupid than you were before you came in, and come to find out I wasn't. I was the same level of stupid that I was before. But I asked him. I said, I had the strangest dream. He's like, "You don't dream under anesthesia." I'm like, "Oh, I did." He was like, "It can't happen." And I realized very quickly that it wasn't a dream. I was trying to process what had just happened. And it took me a good 2 years after that, around 2016, 2017, to really realize, because I still remember what he showed me as vividly today as back in 2014.
Sure.
And basically what, starting off with, everybody's like, oh yeah, when you have an out-of-body experience, you see yourself on the table. I didn't see any of that. I was instantaneously in this, the only way I can describe it is this perfect garden space. It was beautiful. Rolling fields of green. There was a tree in the middle that was the most beautiful tree that I'd ever seen in my life. And people were like, how did you feel when you were there? And it was pure serenity is the only way I can really describe it. I didn't feel anything, but I didn't have any stress. I didn't have any anxiety. I didn't have any fear. Nothing. It was gorgeous. I mean, and like I said, I can go into probably 2 hours of describing what he had shown me in this, but at the edge of this field was this dark forest. And I saw that when I came in, but it was, and I don't know how long, it felt like I was there for years. I have no idea how long it actually was, if it was just a blink of an eye, but God can do these things. He can just give you all of this information at once. And the next thing I know, I'm over in front of the forest, and I'm walking into it, and I see this. The only way I can describe it is a membrane on the left side that I could see figures and shapes behind, and they were trying to get out from behind this. And it took me, again, I thought to myself, okay, I'm going crazy, I'm losing my mind, but I didn't feel any fear in there. It was just profound sadness for what these people were experiencing, and
Did you feel like they were trying to get to the garden?
I did.
Okay.
And that took me a while to figure out, because I'm like,
What's happening?
what's happening? Why? And that's kind of what I talked to other people that had near-death experiences that were Christians themselves. One of the gentlemen that I talked to had gone through 7 iterations of cancer, and he was like, he said, I had that exact same vision, and he said what it told me was these people were the people that I had left behind. And I said, I came to the kind of the same conclusion, but it was more of God was telling me, tell people this testimony. Don't be scared to go out there because people are going to think you're crazy. But there are going to be people like Sean and Chris that will actually listen to you and will go, no, you're not crazy at all. This.
Well, you might be a little crazy.
We're not going to go that far. Anybody that knows me will go, no, that's not right. I was crazy long before this, but this specific story, he was telling me at the time, and again, it took me 2 or 3 years, and so I think back to the people that were writing the Bible, and he was giving them all of this information. I saw maybe a page in a chapter of a book, and they were getting all of this information at once. And to be brave enough to actually go and write his word down at the time when it was a lethal offense. You didn't get away from that. And to express Christian faith at the time, it wasn't just people going, oh, he's crazy. It was people saying, we're going to put you to death. And so it took me 2 or 3 years. And when I met you through the Christian interfaith group that we have, the Christian prayer group that we had that Sean put together truly was a wake up call for me, because I realized even at work I needed to put God first, and that's what I found so interesting about your story, is that was what drove you. And like you said, it's,
he was obedient younger than we were.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're right.
I never really sowed my wild oats.
Right. Yeah. And that was, and it was crazy, because so we moved down, and this is why I tell people to have that perspective, to look back on why things happened, and they are all divine connections. Me meeting you when I came down right before COVID hit was, and like I said, I had never told any stranger my story at all, and the instant that we met, I felt compelled to tell you my story. I don't know why.
You know what? I've retold your story a number of times, because I think, one, I commend you for using your pain for purpose, because I do think you have the ability to save people that might be facing your situation the fear of death. Ultimately, I mean, that's what struck me. Is in my head and my faith, I know that I'm not afraid to die, but we still, when faced with it, you're still terrified. At least I am. Yeah. And so what your story gave me peace. One thing I do want to dial back on and make sure they understand, though, is as you're looking out over those folks behind the membrane, the story for you that connected to me was, those are people you had an opportunity to tell about God, and you didn't. You were not obedient in that moment, and therefore, because you weren't obedient and bold, they're left behind. And you felt their pain.
I felt their pain, and it was, like I said, it was just a profound sorrow, and it wasn't. It was a sorrow for them. It wasn't because I don't remember feeling anything for myself while I was there. It was all on this amazing place that he had shown me, and then when he took me into the forest, it was, I felt sorry for these people that were stuck behind there, and so that's really what drove me. And one of the things the first thing that you asked me, you were like, so you're not really afraid of death, and we talked about this the last time, and you brought up a great point, because I tell people all the time, I try to stay as optimistic.
You are optimistic.
Optimistic as I possibly can. And so I tell people, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm not afraid of death, and I'm really not. I mean, but one thing that I was talking to you guys about, I said, well, it's not like I have a death wish, and Chris was like, don't you? I mean, and he's kind of right. I mean,
because you know of the serenity on the other side.
Yes, and it's because it's not that I'm not afraid to die. I kind of want to get back there as soon as I possibly can.
We're learning how to die.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing that I think a lot of people, they look at death as the end game, and it's really when the book begins.
Yes.
I mean, we're still in the preface, and so to have a death wish, it's dying to yourself and not just viewing this as everything.
Correct.
And that's the place of where we really, I think that's what that vision did for you, is you realize there's more out there.
Yep.
There's a lot more going on. The fact that it was impossible for you to dream.
Yes.
And it's funny because, I mean, I've had actual dreams about places like this, and it's amazing how some of the descriptions even match.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, it's stuff that I've dreamt about where I woke up and I was like,
what just happened? That was
crazy.
weird.
I was like, it's nuts.
That seems to be a parallel across most true near-death experiences. Those are not out for publicity, the ones that really, really experienced it. There are a lot of parallels about gardens and trees and serenity and all the things.
And I think that's what I really want to encourage people to do that have had those, is to just be able to speak about them and let people know you're not alone. You're not, and because for 2 or 3 years, I thought I was.
Well, I will tell you, Luke, one of the things I took away from that was, I am very conscious, and I pray every day that God puts me where he wants me when he wants me there, because I don't want to miss an opportunity that I knew I should have said something.
Mhm.
I'm not out on a mission to,
Right.
stop every person in HEB and talk about Jesus, but when I know it's on my heart that I need to,
Yep.
I don't want to be faced with that moment where I'm looking through that membrane going, I could have
I
talked
could
to
have
that
talked to
person,
that person.
and I did
Yep.
not do
Well,
that.
it's the scene out of the Christmas movie Elf.
It is.
Yes.
I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like when you have one of those type of experience. I mean, I really do wonder, you look at Revelation, you see, John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and we're like, well, that's kind of cool. But
Yeah.
you look at, where was he?
Right.
In exile on Patmos.
Yes.
And if he's in exile, not in a good place, as a prisoner, and still consecrates a day to be before the
Yep.
Lord, and then John, who was the disciple who Jesus loved, in his own
Yes.
words, if he sees Jesus the man and falls on his face, he sees a resurrected Jesus, falls flat on his face. In the flesh, he was the one that literally would be side by side, would rest his head on his shoulder. That sort of closeness, and literally you look at that, and then you wonder, if you saw what John saw,
Yep.
what would it drive you to do?
Right.
And that's the outcome. It's like, well, maybe I would grab everybody in HEB.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to know this.
Yes.
And I ask myself that. I'm like, if I have, if we're accountable for what we've already received, whether it be a vision,
Right.
whether it be, personal experiences, whether it be daily life, whether it be dreams, whether it be, business, whatever, how do we steward that in such a way
Right.
that it drives us into his heart, not just a mission?
Exactly.
I agree.
And that was, for me, yeah, it's been transformative for me, because before all of this, it was all about, and I think this is just a societal problem in general. Me. It was all about.
Part of it was your age. We're
Yes,
a little me,
yeah.
with the exception of Chris.
Chris, yeah,
When
I know,
we're
I
young,
know,
we're kind
I know.
of me.
Yeah.
There you go.
How do I get the free pass here? I'm like,
Right. Come on now.
I feel old sometimes.
But that was, and you're absolutely right. But at the same time, with the upbringing that I had, I knew. We all know what path we're supposed to be taking.
Yeah.
To a degree. We know what's good and what's evil. But once we stray off that path even a little bit, and we start moving towards, this, and none of us are perfect. We're all going to be, we all fall short every day. But when you fall so short that he not only becomes, a distant third to what you're striving for in life, he doesn't even factor into it. Having him put me back on that path, I have become much more aware of when I'm being selfish, and whether
You're becoming more like Jesus.
Yes, and that's really what is Christianity. It is becoming more like Christ. And so,
You talked about a point where you walked away from your faith when your mom died, 26-ish, was
Yeah.
that right? Because I do think, as I even look at my 17-year-old who's just graduating, when you're brought up in a Christian, grounded household, you accept it because that's what you know. You go to church on Sunday, you go to youth group, you accept it. And there's a point in your early 20s, one of the nurses in Drake's accident, which I'll talk about, later, said, that's a box, a suitcase, if you will, that we fill up, for the
Yep.
kids, and then when they go to college, they kind of stick it up in the top of the closet, and they maybe don't take it down unless they need it.
Yep.
But when you're faced with tragedy, you either pull that thing down and rely on
Yep.
it, or you turn the other way, right?
Yep.
So I'm interested, at what point was it for you where you said, I'm no longer mad at God, I understand, my faith is now my own, it's not my parents' faith, it's not my grandmother's faith, it's my faith became my own, and I believe it, and I depended on it.
So I would say, really, it took me until 2018 to really, really coming back.
After the near-death experience,
Yep.
before you really came back and
Right.
said, "I believe this is divine and it's
Yes.
godly." And were you praying before that? Like, were you faith? Like, were you in your faith, or were you
No,
outside of your faith the whole time
I was still outside of my faith
until that experience?
Yeah, until and
Well,
even
sounds like
even
after.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because again, trying to process that through and figure out, because even at even at the time, it wasn't like I was, I still didn't have that perspective to look back and say, okay, all of these things happened for a reason. I was still trying to process through what I had just seen. And I didn't even tell my wife for 6 months or a year after that. I didn't want to tell anybody. Because
Was that all that you saw? Was just kind of the membrane, the forest, the surroundings, the tree?
yeah,
No familiar faces.
no familiar
Garden?
faces.
Did you actually see Jesus?
And okay, so this is where it gets interesting. This is one thing that I have never told anyone.
You're hearing it
Yeah,
here
heard it here first.
Here we go. Here we go. We're all looking at
So-
the camera like this is happening.
So underneath the tree. So this tree that's in the middle of this
Garden,
garden, yeah,
potentially.
yeah, and that's that's kind of what I started equating it to, was this perfect garden. And in front of this tree is this crystal clear pond.
I knew there was water.
Oh yeah. I mean,
gotta be.
well, yeah, exactly. How are you going to fly fish if you don't have water? But I see this beautiful pond, this beautiful tree, and literally told no one ever, the most beautiful being that I had ever seen, ever, in front of this tree, shrouded in light. It's the only way I can explain it.
So all you saw was light, really?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I could see some facial features, but nothing. It was, and the reason I haven't told anybody that, because I didn't know how to explain it.
Articulate it.
Yeah, how to put it into words, because, and
That's the whole I only can imagine song.
yeah. I mean, and I, when I was in the field, I did feel a warmth, but it wasn't from that figure. It was actually on my right side, and so I'm facing straight ahead, and I feel this warmth, and I don't know if that was God, if that was Jesus, or if this being that I saw was, or if
How'd you come back? How'd you exit?
so.
If you know.
So these people were straining to get into the garden, and when I was kind of surrounded by these people, and again, it wasn't a fear thing. It was just I felt so sorry, and I stepped towards the membrane, and I reached out, and that's when I woke up. And
You didn't see any of the faces on the other side of the membrane.
no, it was.
But
I
you
could-
knew
I could-
they were your humans.
Yes, and I could because they were pressing into this membrane, I could make out features, and I knew that they were, I didn't see anybody that I knew personally, and that's why I think my experience was a little bit different from some other people who've had near-death experiences, because they saw people that they
But
knew.
you knew they were your responsibility.
yes,
You
yes.
just didn't know who they were.
Correct.
I mean, it almost begs to say too that maybe it's people coming into your life
Right.
down the road as well. Maybe
Yeah.
not just
Right, not people from my past, but
Right.
but people that I was supposed to talk to, and that's why I've been looking forward to this day for so long. I was telling Chris that when we talked last, we were talking about how you get the most flack when you're right over the target, and last week I had an incredible spiritual struggle going on. I mean, it was
Sure,
full-
the enemy doesn't
full-
want you telling the story.
No, and that's. I mean, it was the whole week saying, okay, well, you're not good enough to tell this story. This isn't what really happened. you don't need to be going out and telling people this. They're all going to think you're crazy. They're all going to, they're going to dismiss you. They're going to, and all of this doubt was just flooding in. And I'm like, towards the end of the week, I was like, okay, this is the enemy that's been working this entire time to come in and break me and tell me not to come and do this week. Because the last time we spoke, I was ready to go, but you had a, and it really is. And I think that's what people need to realize is perspective doesn't have to be, 10 years, 11 years back. Perspective can even be at the end of the day when you look back and you go, I've had all these amazing blessings that have happened, and they're not, some of them are miracles. Some of them are just being profoundly blessed because you look back and you say, okay, this one thing that could have gone differently today didn't, and I'm still here. And I think that's really what I want people to really get to the heart of is having that gratitude just for the little things that happen each and every day in our lives. And if that kind of leads to what you were asking me before is,
I guess I have a lot of questions really is, from that experience, you have kind of this, I guess, a view of Jesus, or at least a micro experience
right.
of heaven, and you can read a lot of things into that however you want to interpret it. I've got my own thoughts about that just sitting here. That's the first time I've heard you tell it in detail.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, my read on that's a little bit different, but the thing that's really cool about it is the fact of you got a glimpse, you got to taste and see, and then you're out of it, and now you're confronted with the reality of that actually happened.
Right.
And where for a moment, what was impossible became possible.
Correct.
And from your story, it took you years to reconcile with that, to where, we're not but just a couple years down the road of you kind of making peace with that and really going, that legit happened.
Right.
So what changed there? Because I know where you're leading is how do you stay grateful in the midst of it? And I know that's the question. But what from that experience, so let's just say you kind of rode through all the analyzation of it, you sought some counsel, now you kind of renewed your faith to a point where you're like, this really happened, everything's ordained.
Yep.
Where are you at in your health process, for one?
Yep.
And for two, once you're confronted with the reality of, I just saw that, but here I sit, how do you stay grateful?
And that's, and when I answered this last time, I said, well, I wake up every day and realize that every day is a new blessing. But it's not even that, because I really thought about that question afterwards. I have, just like last week, I have days that I struggle to get through. just like everybody else does.
You don't wear those on the outside, though.
No, and because I'm stupid and I'm a man and I push them deep down inside and I'm like, no, I'm not going to show this. I'm not going to, no emotion. I'm happy. So I put this mask on every day. And that was one thing that I think I took away from it as well. I have to take the mask off. I have to let people know, look, this isn't all smiles and roses and sunshine. It's tough. Everybody has their bad days. Everybody deals with anxiety and depression, but at the same time, I look at how much he gave me because I was able to reconcile it. And it took me a long time to get to that conclusion that this was an ordained process. He showed me that for a very, very specific purpose. And it was, you're right, tiny glimpse. In our eternal, our spiritual timeline, it was, like a car, going by at 200 miles an hour, and you spot it and you're like, oh, that's all I had, but that was enough for me to work off of. As far as how I keep that optimism going, it's a battle every day, but I know that if I stay true to the mission, the goal that he's given me, I know where I'm going to be. And so, and the only way I can really equate it, I don't know if you've all seen the movie The Book of Eli.
Or not.
One of the best movies out there, and so you have.
I've seen some.
Yeah.
I've seen most of. Denzel's my favorite actor.
Yes. Oh yeah. And he's a strongly devout Christian. Yeah. Very, very
In the movie or
strong.
actually?
Oh, yeah, in actuality, and in the movie, and that was the whole crux of the movie. Not to give out any spoilers, I would encourage everyone to watch it, but it was about how important the Word of God is to the world. He had
Take it for granted.
yeah. He had the last copy of the Bible left on Earth after, and they were hinting in the movie that this was the reason that the war started, was because of faith and Christianity, and he was on a mission given to him by God to get the Bible to a publisher, the last publisher that was left in the world, and all of his struggles that he went through in the meantime. And one of the most amazing things I found in that movie was the prayer that he said at the end, and about how grateful he was to God for all that he had been through. I mean, he had been through so many trials, and we all are. And I think that's the gratitude that I think is hard for a lot of people to actually realize. When we're going through the darkest times in our lives, those are the trials and the tests that he's putting us through, or that he's allowing us to go through, to strengthen our spirit. And because he puts us through those tests, we wouldn't have our testimonies without tests. And so being grateful even for the difficult times that we go through. And I know that sounds weird to a lot of people, but one of the things I told you guys last time, and you brought up a really good point. I always told people up until this point, from 2017 to now, that this was the greatest gift that he had ever given me. And you said, well, it wasn't something that he gave you, it was something that he allowed to happen. And that's a good way of putting it. He allowed it to happen so that I would start walking on the path again, on the path that I was supposed to.
Yeah, and I do think, that's a discussion that comes up amongst a lot of new Christians, I'd say, right? Is if everything happens for a reason, then that means God ordains childhood cancer and all of the trauma that comes to us. And I do believe, I don't know why bad things happen to good people. I do believe some things just happen. We're a broken world.
Yep.
But I do believe God can take and does, if we allow him, take every one of those horrible tragedies to use it for his exponential good. If we're open to it.
And it goes back to perspective. What the whole conversation is about. What are we going to intentionally make this situation in our lives?
Right.
And going back to sharing your story, this is the first time I'm hearing your story.
Yeah.
So phenomenal. I appreciate you sharing that. But I think it's important to understand too, when you do that, you're planting seeds of hope.
Right.
In other people, right? And you were talking earlier about going through struggles, and we all have dark days and dark times.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not just us pulling ourselves out of it.
Right.
It's somebody like you sharing a story, and it's a seed of hope for somebody.
And that's why I felt so convicted for you to tell this story, because what Luke didn't say was the day that we met by chance, just a happen chance, he was actually asked me to meet with him on behalf of a coworker who was in desperate need. So it wasn't even on your, it wasn't even for you.
Yep.
And on that journey to get to Austin, it sounds like the journey of Job. I mean, the car broke down, it caught on fire, everything you own is in it, you barely saved the dog. I mean, it is a story of just unimaginable trauma, on top of the fact that you're dealing with brain cancer and a stressful job. And that you planted a seed of hope in me that inspired me to go talk to other people. I do think you need to offer some grace to yourself to take the mask off.
Yes.
Because I think some people facing your situation look at you and say, I'm not going to be that positive all the time. It's unrealistic. And therefore, so I think there's grace in you saying, I do struggle. I am depressed. I do.
Yep.
But Josh is right. You plant a lot of seeds of hope with this story. There's so many in that story. It's hard to even count.
It lets people know that optimism isn't a light switch.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And you've got to go through your bad days to get to your good days.
Yep.
And you said it earlier about sitting back at the end of the day and taking audit of your day and saying, okay, there's a lot of good that happened there.
Yep.
And I think if you can go through that exercise on a daily basis, you begin to, like the Bible says, to renew your mind.
Yep.
And the next day you go in with you wake up with different perspective than you fell asleep with.
Yes.
Right. And daily and day by day, it gets better. Right. And it doesn't omit us from trials or tribulation,
Right.
or hard times or bad times.
Yeah.
But it gives us the perspective when it does.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Says they're coming.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. None of us are exempt from it.
Right.
But when it happens and you've been sowing those seeds every day of perspective, or
Yeah.
you want to call it optimism, whatever you want to call it, when you've been doing that, then all of a sudden it's not as hard to pull yourself out.
Right. It's not as big of a burden to lift
Right.
when you've already, like the box that you were talking about when they go off to college. It's not so much to unpack. You've already unpacked that. You know what's in the box, so it's a lighter load to carry. But at the same time, it's and that's, I think, one of the things too with the whole idea of perspective is finding that group of people that you can be around, and that you can talk to, and that you can be open with and honest with, because it doesn't just, you're right, it's not a light switch that happens.
You got to pray them in.
Yeah, and that's it's like the old tale of the king that told one of his people, I want something that when I'm happy makes me sad, and when I'm sad makes me happy. And the guy comes back with a bracelet that says, "This too shall pass." So knowing, when you're happy, you look down and go, everything's going great for me. It's not going to last forever.
We're just resting up for the next battle.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you're in your deepest, darkest despair, this too shall pass. And so it really is knowing those cycles that you go through, and knowing that things are going to get better on the other side. And a lot of it has to do with faith.
So that brings me to a point.
Yeah.
And I told you I was going to ask some hard questions.
Yes, and I'm glad you are.
So I'm and at the risk of even going outside the lines here a little
Nope.
bit. So, you mentioned it's all about faith, but in Scripture it says, you're right. Even the demons believe that there's one God, and they know that and they tremble. It basically says, you believe there's one God, whoop-de-doo. It's what,
right.
What they're writing is like, wow, even the demons know that and tremble. Yeah. So there's the faith element, but I mean, as far as when you talk about, we view, I feel like a lot of Christians view Christianity as disciplines and, doing the stuff and going to church, and, faith is
right.
This real ambiguous word that, Jesus, even though I know he was completely surrendered to his Father, it says he only does what he sees his Father doing. You didn't really see Jesus have to hang the faith on ambiguity.
Correct.
It was all about relational aspect with his Father.
Yep.
So in the terms of I don't want to ever view my Christian walk as just faith.
Faith.
I mean, now, without faith, it's impossible to please God. I understand that. I know there's plenty of verses that you can back that up. But what Jesus really paid for was relationship. Mm-hmm. So if I look at that, if he made a way where there was no way, now you're in this place of rediscovering faith, as it were. What did that pull from you in a relational aspect to God? Because I feel like that is the number one thing. Yep. It truly is it's not even just the number one thing. It is the difference between Christianity and every other religion on the planet.
Correct.
Is you actually have a relationship with God. And you had a God that was willing to give himself for you. That is a total, absolute differentiating factor with Christianity over every other religion.
Yes.
So what, in your circumstance, after coming through all of that, what did it draw from you relationally with Jesus Christ? What happened there?
So
To go from Christian upbringing to
to
where you
where
are now.
I was. Yeah, where I am now. And so yeah, I had that time period in between, my mom's death and
Sure.
coming back around to that relationship that I still wasn't in. And you're right. I mean, it wasn't just that, because I never lost, and I guess this is a really good point to it. I never lost my faith.
No.
I always, even when I was going through, even when my mom passed away, I was angry at God, but I never once questioned, did Jesus die on the cross for my sins?
Okay.
So it didn't ever take me out of Christianity. What it did do was solidify my understanding of being more like him, wanting to be closer to him, because I was close to him there. And I remember how amazing that felt.
But even the time in the prime of your faith, if we will, before your mom died, you didn't have a relationship with Jesus.
No, it was.
You
I was
just
going,
believed in God. You believed in Jesus.
I was going through the motions.
Well, at the risk of sounding horrible,
Yeah.
I personally believe religion's sending more people to hell than
I do.
anything.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, where we've done the stuff,
Yep.
but nobody.
checked the box.
We checked a box, but we
Yep.
never pursued his heart. There was never a yes in our heart to him. We never put on the ring.
Yeah, we
Exactly.
can go to church
Yep.
every Sunday.
yeah.
Yep.
and say we're Christians.
I can walk in and
Yep.
leave the same way. Heck, I used to be a pastor, so
Yeah.
I'm still an ordained minister. But it's one of those things of like, I know how to play church. I can
Yeah.
do it professionally.
Exactly.
So
I didn't just play one on TV, but that is such a great point, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, when I was growing up, it was purely, I didn't understand. I didn't have the mind to understand. I say I grew up in the Mennonite community, and but I didn't really know even what a relationship with Christ looked like, because I was young and stupid. And really I didn't even know what a relationship with Christ looked like until I wrapped my head around what he had shown me and where that came out. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you asked the question. I know you said, not to get off, going off the rails, but that is absolutely within the box, because that is something that even I'm guilty of, is talking to people about faith and religion. And it's not, it is your walk with the Godhead, with the Trinity in your life, listening to the Holy Spirit. We have the Creator, we have the Great Redeemer, we have the Shepherd, and all of those are one. And unless we have a relationship with God, faith is useless.
I have to ask, because that is really thought-provoking for me, because if I look back on my life, and there's no testimony without a test, I've had two pretty massive ones that we'll talk about later. And one of them was until I was 37. I'm not sure that before that I understood what a relationship with God was. Like, I was faithful,
Sure.
I
Yep.
prayed, I went to church, I did all the things.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I prayed, which was a conversation, but it wasn't truly a relationship until I went through trauma. So now because I'm a social experiment here, now I need to know, when did you two find your relationship versus faith? Was it born out of an incident also?
No, I think for me, it was actually pretty young in life, probably my late teens, I would say.
Wow.
And it's funny because I read the words, I heard the words, and it's funny you say you think more religion sends more people to hell than anything else, but I didn't see the people in the church that I was in living those words, right?
Yeah.
And I was a kid coming up, right? So it's not like I was pointing fingers, but 1 and 1 was not equaling 2 there. And I really went inward, and that's when I started to conversate, and I was like, okay, God, this isn't about the name on the church, and this isn't about the pastor.
Yep.
This is about my relationship with you, right? And to me, the biggest indicator of that in people is how they treat others.
Right.
Genuinely, right? And not just the formalities like
Right.
you talked about. Everybody can play church,
Yep.
but when the lights are off, do you wish well for people?
Correct.
Right? Are you trying to find ways how you can bless someone's life, or how can you be the hands and feet of Jesus here. And I've always said, and I try to model my life that way, is I shouldn't have to tell people I'm a Christian.
Right.
My walk should show it.
Yeah.
Right. I should be the hands and feet of Jesus. I should be doing His work. I should be doing the things that I feel that the Holy Spirit is telling me He would be doing, and those should speak for itself.
Your mama was the hands and feet of Jesus for you every day.
No, for sure. And that's similar to my story to yours. Is, I mean, my mother was my best friend, and genuinely the best role model of Christianity that I know of. And so, but to answer your question, Sean, I would say it was pretty early for me because, and I can say this even within the confines of my extended and somewhat immediate family, I felt isolated because there was a lot of religion being played and not a lot of relationship being played. And
that's awesome that you are learning that in your teens.
Yeah. I mean, and it resulted in some...
Because you could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
It resulted in some pretty difficult conversations with my father, because it was this way and this was the only way. And I knew I was prompted to go another direction. Yeah. But like all God things, it came full circle, and there was just a ton of respect after that.
Yeah. And that's actually a great point. I hadn't even told my dad about what I had experienced until probably a month ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
You told me first.
Yes. I told you, and the reason I had to, because he's been in the same spot that I've been for going on 20 years now, where he was still angry at God for what had happened, and why did this, why do bad things happen to good people? Like you said, it doesn't really matter. It's about that relationship that you have with God, and whether or not you can look back and say, I now see the reason for this. I mean, not all bad things came out of my mom passing away. Because she passed away, I started looking at brain diseases, and I think that's one reason why I was able to handle the diagnosis the way I did, because I had been studying what had happened to her, and then, not the same thing, but a similar thing happened to me. Right. And had she not passed away, I wouldn't be in Texas now. I probably wouldn't be married to my wife. I wouldn't even be on this path of trying to find a relationship with God. It would be, I would be out there doing the same stupid stuff I was doing as a kid, and doing the church thing and the faith thing, but not seeking a relationship at all. And I would not be in the same place.
Understood.
How about you?
Mine was very, very young. So I grew up.
What was on
Why? What happened to us?
I do not remember a day in my life that I didn't love Jesus or just grow up in an atmosphere. My dad was a pastor when I was born. And so, I grew up in church, Christian household, loving family, whole nine yards. Just one of the truly a blessed story. I don't take that for granted for a second, because now having kids and understanding like how hard it is to actually be a parent. I'm like, my mother and my father,
we're saints.
Beyond. I'm like, God, the crowns will be big and heavy.
Yes.
But at 5, I had a realization of like, oh my goodness, Jesus did that for me at 5.
Wow.
I've got a 4-year-old girl at the house, and I'm just like, how was
She's not going to get it by 5.
Well, no, she very well could, but I'm like, how at that age, and I was very early. Most kids never get it that early.
Yeah.
But like, how at that age was I already thinking on that level? And,
right.
And I knew that I was like, I want to be in that relationship.
Yeah.
And so I just knew like, if he died on the cross and that was for me, I wanted to say yes, even if it was a 5-year-old. Most people are like, you didn't have anything to be saved from. You were like 5 years old. And like, that didn't matter.
You're right.
That didn't matter to me. And so it was interesting because still did the church thing, still, Sunday school, Sundays, Wednesday nights, whatever you could be there, whatever, Bible studies, VBSs, whatever else when you're a kid. And I guess it was probably around like 5th or 6th grade. So I don't know what that is. What is that, like 10, 11?
11.
Yeah, so 10, 11 years old. it just hit me. I'm like, this is a relationship. And it was funny because in church they're trying to get you, read your Bible and,
quiet
go
time.
deep in God, have your quiet time.
Yeah.
And you're like, what on earth does that mean?
Right.
You're like, I've been doing this since I was a kid. Like, why is this any different? Is this just like a grown-up way of saying, do the stuff?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I would say what really entered for me was the reality of what worship really was.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened. Is it's like, this is really all about you.
Yep.
And if you go look at the life of Jesus, the only people that really didn't get who Jesus was the church of his day.
Yes.
The Pharisees.
Yep.
It was
yeah.
literally the religious figures of his day were the only people that missed Jesus. And like, how often can that be said of our, local entities or even the global entity of the church? And I'm like, God, how often can that be said of me?
Yes.
Where I get so tied up in my own preconceived ideas of you
Yep.
that I miss who you really are. So I was, probably preteen when relationship really took hold.
That is so
And
awesome.
I
That
mean,
is awesome.
middle school and high school were epic. I mean, like,
Wow.
I mean, when I say epic, there are things about then that I so miss now as a grown adult. Like, I could tell you stories that would freak you out. I mean, like, straight, I have seen things you're not supposed to be able to see. I have felt things you're not supposed to be able to feel. I have seen miracles happen at my hands. I had friends over. I'm like, guys, let's go worship for a bit. I mean, who does that?
Yeah, right,
I'm
right.
like, what
Yeah,
high school
yeah.
kid goes, let's come over, let's just worship God. And we do, and we're all like,
And by
bawling
worship-
in the room and
yeah.
walking out, and you're like,
By worship, do you mean having a beer? I mean, what?
right, exactly. No,
Yeah.
there was none of that. It was so funny. But although, funny enough, we talked about Pentecost, and they're like, how are they drunk? It's midday.
Right.
It's like, it's really early, and they're drunk already. And I was walking out of my room at 15, 16. I couldn't walk down the stairs. And my parents
Yep.
knew me, and they're like, nothing bad went on in that room. He's just had music cranked and
Yep.
singing his guts out for
Yep.
3 hours.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I went places in God that I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. And so now, that has so molded and shaped the path that I'm on now. I mean, it's the only reason that the fly shop exists is I
Yeah.
prayed, God, what should I do with my life? He said, open a fly
Open a
shop.
fly-
It is a really cool fly shop. I have to
Yes.
say. I didn't even know, first of all, I'm not a fly fisher, but it is really awesome down there. I didn't know
Yeah.
Round Rock had awesome things like that.
Yes.
There you go.
I mean, it's really cool because I travel quite a bit, and I've been to a lot of fly shops, and I love fly shops. I love going in them. I love shopping them. I buy stuff at almost every one I go to, and when I come home, I'm like, there is just no place like this that feels like
Yeah.
this,
Nice.
and that this atmosphere exists, and that really the purpose of my entire staff down there is to love people well.
Yep.
And I've had people come in here literally, they said, we don't need a thing, we just need
That's
prayer.
an important
Yep.
And I'm
mission
like,
statement.
great.
Okay, great.
And I'm
Yeah,
like,
and-
that's it. Love God, love people. That's
Yep.
what Jesus summed up
Pretty
everything.
simple.
And the first time that we met, I was working for, I'm trying to get some things going for an organization called Real Recovery that works with men who have had cancer, teaching them how to fly fish, and so I got involved with them, and they are not a religious organization at all. And that's one of the things they actually wanted to keep out, and it was odd to me a little bit, but you do you. And so I went down to another fly shop, and learned. They taught me how to fly fish, and one of them, one of the guys that I was working with, is very, very, very strong in his faith, and he was like, "You have to go down to Living Waters Fly Shop. They're right in Round Rock." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I'll go in there." First time I met you, I told you my story, and you said, "I don't think you're crazy at all. I think,
Try me."
yeah, try me." Yeah, that was essentially what you said. You said, I could blow you away with the stories that I've had in my own personal life, just like you were saying. And that's why I'm so interested in interviewing both of you to share some of these stories to make that relationship stronger between people that are truly walking it, or to show people that it's not just about faith or church or religion or...
Well, it's what he paid for.
Right.
I mean, I want to give Jesus what he paid for.
Yeah,
So I mean, if he gave all of him, all of me is the automatic response.
exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
that's what he's worthy of.
Right. Are you
So-
willing to die?
And if you're not,
Yeah.
then I'd question really your faith in general.
Yep. Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you think you have greater faith in your ability to hold on to what you think is yours
Yep.
than you do in surrender before a holy God.
Exactly. And that's
I question it.
and that is actually a really, really good point that I hadn't even thought about before now, that I had wanted to talk about on the podcast was the complete surrender of yourself, your actions and your deeds and your words to Christ. And so many people fight that. So many people are like, well, yeah, I can walk this by myself, just like I was back then. And I can't. I mean, and that was one of the things that I learned early on in this process, almost from the day that it happened. I'm not in control of anything. And I just had to come to the full realization, he controls everything that I do, and I have to be willing to do whatever he says, whether it leads me to death or not. Eventually it'll be there, but I'm actually looking forward to it. I mean, and looking forward to giving all that I can while I'm here for him. And I think that's such a great point, that most people don't understand what true surrender is, because they're so used to trying to control even the smallest things in their life. And
we view here as everything.
Yes. Yeah. We view the flesh as all there is.
This is it.
Yep. And it's not. You said it really well in the beginning of the podcast, that this is a blink of an eye. I mean, what we have in terms of our fleshly bodies here is nothing. And it's just creating that relationship and what we can do to honor him when he gave all for us.
Good stuff.
Amen.
Amen.
Absolutely.
All right. Any more
Thank you.
questions?
No questions for me.
Awesome.
We're good. Thank you.
Thanks
Well,
for
everybody,
having us.
yeah, I really appreciate it. Sean, thank you so much for the past year and a half of just pushing me to do this. And
It took that long?
it did. It really
Let's not be
did.
very good at pushing.
I'm about to say, you need to work on your vocal.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Chris
gonna
is
blame
good.
COVID.
Right. Yeah.
Could've gotten there sooner.
Yeah.
Then you have permission to wear it.
Right.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you. But I mean, you've all been hugely helpful to making this happen and pushing me to where I was comfortable doing it. So,
Let's keep it going. I
We will.
nominate Chris next.
oh yeah, yep.
Throw me under the bus.
Yep, Chris is next. Sean's right after that, and
Josh has got
Josh
a
is-
great.
come on.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna push on Josh. He's got to tell his story. He's got
Yes.
his story.
Well, I'd just say there's nothing more impactful than people's stories,
Yeah,
and that's what reaches others.
Yep.
It's important to share 'em.
People
I
can
know.
argue with your experience.
Right.
They can debate you on
They-
theology
yeah,
all day long.
yeah,
But
but they can't argue
cannot
with-
battle your experience.
nope, they cannot.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining me, and thank you all for listening. We will be back with more stories later.
Yeah.
All right. And yes, I will get this edited, and man, that was awesome.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
What I know is it's going to end up in any hands it's supposed to end up
Yep.
in, whether